Relation to matter. Mind-body problem. The mind-body problem is the difficulty of providing a general explanation of the relationship between mind and body, for example, of the link between thoughts and brain processes. Despite their different characteristics, mind and body interact with each other, like when a bodily change causes mental discomfort or when a limb moves because of an intention. According to substance dualism, minds or souls exist as distinct substances that have mental states while material things are another type of substance. This view implies that, at least in principle, minds can exist without bodies. Property dualism is another form of dualism that says that mind and matter are not distinct individuals but different properties that apply to the same individual. Monist views, by contrast, state that reality is made up of only one kind. According to idealists, everything is mental. They understand material things as mental constructs, for example, as ideas or perceptions. According to neutral monists, the world is at its most fundamental level neither physical nor mental but neutral. They see physical and mental concepts as convenient but superficial ways to describe reality. The monist view most influential in contemporary philosophy is physicalism, also referred to as materialism, which states that everything is physical. According to eliminative physicalism, there are no mental phenomena, meaning that things like beliefs and desires do not form part of reality. Reductive physicalists defend a less radical position. They say that mental states exist but can, at least in principle, be completely described by physics without the need for special sciences like psychology. For example, behaviorists aim to analyze mental concepts in terms of observable behavior without resorting to internal mental states. Type identity theory also belongs to reductive physicalism and says that mental states are the same as brain states. While non-reductive physicalists agree that everything is physical, they say that mental concepts describe physical reality on a more abstract level that cannot be achieved by physics. According to functionalism, mental concepts do not describe the internal constitution of physical substances but functional roles within a system. For example, part of the functional role of pain is given by its relation to bodily injury and its tendency to cause behavioral patterns like moaning and other mental states, like the desire to stop the pain. One consequence of this view is that mind does not depend on brains but can also be realized by other systems that implement the corresponding functional roles, possibly also computers. The hard problem of consciousness is a central aspect of the mind-body problem. It is the challenge of explaining how physical states can give rise to conscious experience. Its main difficulty lies in the subjective and qualitative nature of consciousness, which is unlike typical physical processes. The hard problem of consciousness contrasts with the easy problems of explaining how certain aspects of consciousness function, such as perception, memory, or learning.
Brain areas and processes. Another approach to the relation between mind and matter uses empirical observation to study how the brain works, and which brain areas and processes are associated with specific mental phenomena. The brain is the central organ of the nervous system and is present in all vertebrates and the majority of invertebrates. The human brain is of particular complexity and consists of 86 billion neurons, which communicate with one another via synapses. They form a complex neural network and cognitive processes emerge from their electrical and chemical interactions. The human brain is divided into regions that are associated with different functions. The main regions are the hindbrain, midbrain, and forebrain. The hindbrain and the midbrain are responsible for many biological functions associated with basic survival, while higher mental functions, ranging from thoughts to motivation, are primarily localized in the forebrain. The primary operation of many of the main mental phenomena is located in specific areas of the forebrain. The prefrontal cortex is responsible for executive functions, such as planning, decision-making, problem-solving, and working memory. The role of the sensory cortex is to process and interpret sensory information, with different subareas dedicated to different senses, like the visual and the auditory areas. A central function of the hippocampus is the formation and retrieval of long-term memories. It belongs to the limbic system, which plays a key role in the regulation of emotions through the amygdala. The motor cortex is responsible for planning, executing, and controlling voluntary movements. Broca's area is a separate region dedicated to speech production. The activity of the different areas is additionally influenced by neurotransmitters. which are signaling molecules that enhance or inhibit different types of neural communication. For example, dopamine influences motivation and pleasure, while serotonin affects mood and appetite. The close interrelation of brain processes and the mind is seen by the effect that physical changes of the brain have on the mind. For instance, the consumption of psychoactive drugs like caffeine, antidepressants, alcohol, and psychedelics temporarily affects brain chemistry with diverse effects on the mind, ranging from increased attention to mood changes, impaired cognitive functions, and hallucinations. Long-term changes to the brain in the form of neurodegenerative diseases and brain injuries can lead to permanent alterations in mental functions. Alzheimer's disease in its first stage deteriorates the hippocampus, reducing the ability to form new memories and recall existing ones. An often cited case of the effects of brain injury is Phineas Gage, whose prefrontal cortex was severely damaged during a work accident when an iron rod pierced through his skull and brain. Gage survived the accident, but his personality and social attitude changed significantly as he became more impulsive, irritable, and antisocial while showing little regard for social conventions and an impaired ability to plan and make rational decisions. Not all these changes were permanent, and Gage managed to recover and adapt in some areas.
Evolution. The evolution of human intelligence refers to several theories that aim to describe how human intelligence has evolved in relation to the evolution of the human brain and the origin of language. The timeline of human evolution spans some 7 million years, from the separation of the genus Pan until the emergence of behavioral modernity by 50,000 years ago. Of this timeline, the first 3 million years concern Sahelanthropus, the following 2 million concern Australopithecus, while the final 2 million span the history of actual Homo species, the Paleolithic. Many traits of human intelligence, such as empathy, theory of mind, mourning, ritual, and the use of symbols and tools, are already apparent in great apes, although in lesser sophistication than in humans. There is a debate between supporters of the idea of a sudden emergence of intelligence, or great leap forward, and those of a gradual or continuum hypothesis.
Philosophy. Philosophy of mind is the branch of philosophy that studies the nature of the mind, mental events, mental functions, mental properties, consciousness, and their relationship to the physical body. The mind-body problem, i.e. the relationship of the mind to the body, is commonly seen as the central issue in philosophy of mind, although there are other issues concerning the nature of the mind that do not involve its relation to the physical body. José Manuel Rodríguez Delgado writes, in present popular usage, soul and mind are not clearly differentiated, and some people, more or less consciously, still feel that the soul, and perhaps the mind, may enter or leave the body as independent entities. Dualism and monism are the two major schools of thought that attempt to resolve the mind-body problem. Dualism is the position that mind and body are in some way separate from each other. It can be traced back to Plato, Aristotle, and the Nyaya, Samkhya and Yoga schools of Hindu philosophy, but it was most precisely formulated by René Descartes in the 17th century. Substance dualists argue that the mind is an independently existing substance, whereas property dualists maintain that the mind is a group of independent properties that emerge from and cannot be reduced to the brain, but that it is not a distinct substance. The 20th century philosopher Martin Heidegger suggested that subjective experience and activity, i.e. that the mind, cannot be made sense of in terms of Cartesian substances that bear properties at all, whether the mind itself is thought of as a distinct, separate kind of substance or not. This is because the nature of subjective, qualitative experience is incoherent in terms of, or semantically incommensurable with the concept of, substances that bear properties. This is a fundamentally ontological argument. The philosopher of cognitive science Daniel Dennett, for example, argues there is no such thing as a narrative center called the mind, but that instead there is simply a collection of sensory inputs and outputs, different kinds of software running in parallel. Psychologist B.F. Skinner argued that the mind is an explanatory fiction that diverts attention from environmental causes of behavior. He considered the mind a black box and thought that mental processes may be better conceived of as forms of covert verbal behavior. Philosopher David Chalmers has argued that the third-person approach to uncovering mind and consciousness is not effective, such as looking into others' brains or observing human conduct, but that a first-person approach is necessary. Such a first-person perspective indicates that the mind must be conceptualized as something distinct from the brain. The mind has also been described as manifesting from moment to moment, one thought moment at a time, as a fast-flowing stream, where sense impressions and mental phenomena are constantly changing.
Scientific study. Neuroscience. Neuroscience studies the nervous system, the physical basis of the mind. At the systems level, neuroscientists investigate how biological neural networks form and physiologically interact to produce mental functions and content such as reflexes, multisensory integration, motor coordination, circadian rhythms, emotional responses, learning, and memory. The underlying physical basis of learning and memory is likely dynamic changes in gene expression that occur in brain neurons. Such expression changes are introduced by epigenetic mechanisms. Epigenetic regulation of gene expression ordinarily involves chemical modification of DNA or DNA-associated histone proteins. Such chemical modifications can cause long-lasting changes in gene expression. Epigenetic mechanisms employed in learning and memory include the DNMT3A promoted methylation and TET promoted demethylation of neuronal DNA, as well as methylation, acetylation, and deacetylation of neuronal histone proteins. Also, long-term excitation of neural pathways and subsequent endocrinal signaling can provide a capacity for structural activation of gene expression in the histone code, allowing a potential mechanism of throughput epigenetic interaction with the nervous system. According to the computationalist paradigm, efforts in computational neuroscience have developed large-scale models that simulate simple, functioning brains. As of 2012, such models include the thalamus, basal ganglia, prefrontal cortex, motor cortex, and occipital cortex, and consequentially simulated brains can learn, respond to visual stimuli, coordinate motor responses, form short-term memories, and learn to respond to patterns. Currently, researchers aim to program the hippocampus and limbic system, hypothetically imbuing the simulated mind with long-term memory and crude emotions. By contrast, effective neuroscience studies the neural mechanisms of personality, emotion, and mood primarily through experimental tasks. Contemporary neuroscience research reports a large-scale neuronal integration associated with the mental functions in the brain. This neuronal orchestra cannot be explained only by linear integration due to synaptic interactions. Therefore, a mechanism of temporal coordination for neuronal interaction due to oscillatory synchronization is the mainstream in neuroscience research, i.e., the idea of brain-wave interactions for network oscillatory synchronization. According to Professor of Radboud University Martin Vink and colleagues, a mechanism of temporal coordination for neuronal interaction can be explained by 4 hypotheses. 1. Oscillatory synchronization, communication through coherence. 2. Communication through resonance. 3. Nonlinear integration, and 4. Linear signal transmission, coherence through communication. Most brain activities display oscillations in 4 frequency orders, from the infralow, less than 0.01 Hz, to ultrafast, 200 Hz, oscillations, delta, 0.5 to 4 Hz, theta, 4 to 8 Hz, alpha activity, 8 to 13 Hz, beta, 13 to 30 Hz, and gamma, 30 to 200 Hz, frequency bands.
Cognitive science. Cognitive science examines the mental functions that give rise to information processing, termed cognition. These include perception, attention, working memory, long-term memory, producing and understanding language, learning, reasoning, problem-solving, and decision-making. Cognitive science seeks to understand thinking, in terms of representational structures in the mind and computational procedures that operate on those structures. At the birth of cognitive science in the 1960s and 1970s, the paradigm of the computational theory of mind was widely adopted. This paradigm holds that the mind is essentially a computational system, and its explanation needs to be provided in terms of a computational description. More recently, rival paradigms gained ground within cognitive science, namely the neurophysical description and the intentional description. Though the interface between neuroscience and an exact model of cognition is not yet made, Progress in biological neuron models help to mathematically quantify cognitive neuroscience and elaborate a theory of mind that can be provable. However, a theoretically fundamental synthesis in psychology, cognitive science, neuroscience, and biophysics must be made for the problem of mind and its faculties to gain tractable scientific ground. Over the past years, research in cognitive sciences has highlighted the importance of the body for cognition. Proponents of the embodied cognition theory of mind hold that cognition, and mental phenomena, is the product of active interactions between individuals and their surrounding environment.
Psychology. Psychology is the scientific study of human behavior, mental functioning, and experience. As both an academic and applied discipline, psychology involves the scientific study of mental processes such as perception, cognition, emotion, personality, as well as environmental influences, such as social and cultural influences and interpersonal relationships, in order to devise theories of human behavior. Psychological patterns can be understood as low-cost ways of information processing. Psychology also refers to the application of such knowledge to various spheres of human activity, including problems of individuals' daily lives and the treatment of mental health problems. Psychology differs from the other social sciences, e.g. anthropology, economics, political science, and sociology, due to its focus on experimentation at the scale of the individual, or individuals in small groups as opposed to large groups, institutions, or societies. Historically, psychology differed from biology and neuroscience in that it was primarily concerned with mind rather than brain. Modern psychological science incorporates physiological and neurological processes into its conceptions of perception, cognition, behavior, and mental disorders. Psychiatry, neurology, and neurosurgery. Psychiatry, neurology, and neurosurgery are the specialties within the field of medicine that are devoted to the study of the mind and to the treatment of humans with mental disorders and other medical conditions affecting the mind and nervous system. Psychiatrists, neurologists, and neurosurgeons conduct research in clinical, academic, and industry settings.